Hello, everybody. I believe this is lecture number 10. This is going to be the last lecture in my favorite section. In this lecture, we talk about gender and sexuality. This is a pretty interesting one. Again, there's only one lecture because the video is so long that I kind of wanted to space it out. And plus, I think it's easier to talk about it. It's easier to think about it when we separate it, right? So the last section we went over race, ethnicity, nationality, and more importantly, we went over that how it applies with Diablo and Adam. Hope you find that one interesting. Now for this one, usually in class it gets a little spicy, but I really think that it's pretty important to understand this topic. Now that being said, you have to understand that researchers, people who are like really into this topic, they spend their whole careers studying this stuff, right? So like I'm giving you we're talking about gender sexualities this week, and last week we talked about race, ethnicity, and nationality. People will spend like their whole academic careers, like their whole PhD, like dissertation or whatever, on these one topic, on these singular topics. So just keep in mind that I am giving you the introductory kind of lowdown on these topics, but they go very, very deep. And I'm just kind of giving you like the fun intro to it. Okay. So, real quickly, some announcements. The reflection 3 will be due at the end of this week, and then the midterm will be due next week. Okay. Again, if you have any questions, just shoot me an email. Oh, that's the incorrect date. Don't worry about the date. I will change that. Actually, I'll change that right now. Let me change that right now. Okay. What does it do? 4/19? Is it 19? Yeah, 4/19. Oops. All right, and make sure that you're are checking out the study guide, and then studying will be a lot easier. Okay. All right. Let's get into it. All right, great. So 20 questions multiple choice, four short answer questions. Those are going to be worth a lot of points. Make sure you do those well. You'll have about 90 minutes to do one attempt, which is again a class period. Yeah, if you have any questions, just shoot me an email and I'll be happy to answer you. All right, so this is kind of similar to the thing about question we had a while ago, right? Where it's like, what is natural versus cultural, right? And we came, if you remember from that lecture, natural is something that is biological, something that you that is something that's biological, and cultural is something that you learn, right? So what is something that is natural of one sex and something that you believe is social cultural of one sex, right? So this is very important, right? Sex and gender are two very different things. Okay, sex is the biological definition or assignment of a sex, male or female, and social cultural is the things that we learn that's associated with being a male or female, right? Of being a man or a woman. Okay, so those are two very different things. Okay, natural, again, biological, social cultural, things that we learn. Okay, now things that are natural of one sex are pretty straightforward, right? Private areas, the reproductive systems. There are some specific things like the hip bones on women are wider, for childbirth. Men have what's it called? More upper body strength. Females tend to have a higher voice, while males have a lower voice. Right? These are all natural things of being a male or female. Now, things that are social cultural is basically everything else, right? So, what is, I don't know, like long hair, makeup, what everything else is social culture. Okay, the reason why I don't want to get too deep into it is because toward the end we're going to talk more about this. Okay, so wait, what's going on? Oh, this is at toward the end. Sorry, I messed this up. Let me edit this real quick. It should not be This should be toward the end, I believe. Why? Hold on, let me double check. Yeah, this is, yeah, what the heck? Why is this over here? Okay. Sorry, let me just fix this real quick. So we're gonna watch a quick video. While we watch this video, I will edit the PowerPoint. Let's see. I wonder if I wonder if did I put that over there because it didn't allow me to do it. All right, let me throw this up there. Not an anthropologist. We're going to be listening to a woman named Judith Butler about gender and performativity. Let's how do we do this? Okay. Yeah. So yeah, Judith Butler is not. Remember, she's not an anthropologist, and we'll talk about why that's interesting toward the end. But Judith Butler is one of the OG like pioneers of gender studies. Judith Butler is, I believe, they are from a philosophy background. Yeah, they are from a philosophy background, and a lot of the stuff that Judith did was like very transformative for understanding gender overall. Okay, but this one is specific to our class, and we're just gonna take a look at this one.
It's one thing to say that gender is performed, and that's a little different from saying gender is performative. When we say gender is performed, we usually mean that we've taken on a role, we're acting in some way, and that our acting or our role playing is crucial to the gender that we are and the gender that we present to the world. To say that gender is performative is a little different because for something to be performative means that it produces a series of effects. We act and walk and speak and talk in ways that consolidate an impression of being a man or being a woman. You know, I was walking down the street in Berkeley when I first arrived several years ago, and a young woman who was, I think, in high school leaned out of her window and she yelled, "Are you a lesbian?" And, and she was looking to harass me. Or maybe she was just freaked out, or she thought I looked like I probably was one and wanted to know. But instead, I just turned around and I said, "Yes, I am." And that really shocked her. We act as if that being of a man or that being of a woman is actually an internal reality or something that's simply true about us, a fact about us. Actually, it's a phenomenon that's being produced all the time and reproduced all the time. So gender is performative is to say that nobody really is a gender from the start. I know it's controversial, but that's my claim. Think about how difficult it is for sissy boys or how difficult it is for tomboys to function socially without being bullied or without being teased or without sometimes suffering threats of violence. Or without their parents intervening to say, maybe you need a psychiatrist or why can't you be normal? So, you know, there are institutional powers like psychiatric normalization, and there are informal kinds of practices like bullying, which try to keep us in our gendered place. There's a real question for me about how such gender norms get established and policed, and what the best way is to disrupt them and to overcome the police function. It's my view that gender is culturally formed, but it's also a domain of agency or freedom. It's most important to resist the violence that is imposed by ideal gender norms, especially against those who are gender different, who are non-conforming in their gender presentation.
Okay, so she talked about a couple of things there, right? Let's talk about the reason why it's important that she's not an anthropologist. The notion that gender is cultural is nothing like revolutionary, especially for anthropologists, right? For this class, it's important because like I'm just trying to show you this thing, but so she said talk about gender being cultural, right? But what's interesting is the notion of things being performative, right? And the reason why it's important is because when things are performed, okay, not performative, when things are performed, what's interesting about things that are performed, right, is that you are consciously doing it, okay? For example, if you were to sing a song in front of an audience, if you were to dance in front of an audience, you do anything in front of an audience, that would be a performance, right? You are actively and consciously doing that. Performative, however, is something that's a little more subconscious, something that you do without even really knowing that you're doing it, right? And that's a very interesting take on gender. Okay, now it is something that we do and reinforce all the time. Okay, so this is a quote from her, from actually not from no, it is from her, but it's from another book. Um, Judith Butler argues that gender is something people accomplish through a set of repeated acts within a highly rigid regulatory frame that congeals over time to produce the appearance of substance of a natural sort of being. Okay. Now this question, or sorry, this quote is going to be very important. If you're not watching this lecture, you're going to be screwed because this is a very important quote that you need to break down. So, gender is something people accomplish, right? Gender is something people do, okay, performative, through a set of repeated acts, okay, within a highly rigid regulatory frame. A set of repeated acts, that's pretty straightforward, things you do over and over again, within a highly rigid regulatory frame. That's a little confusing. In this case, what she is talking about, or what Judith is talking about, is society. Okay, what is highly rigid regulatory frame? What it really means is that there's a certain way to do things, and if you don't do them, you will be quote unquote regulated, right? You will be sometimes penalized, sometimes you'll be encouraged, but there is a way to do things, and it is regulated, meaning that people will make sure you're doing it a certain way. Okay, so a good example for this, right, would be um, if you see little kids and like like one of the I've seen this like a little boy second grade like have like a pink folder and then all the other kids were making fun of him for having a pink folder. It is because that classroom or society is a regulatory frame, meaning that the making fun of that kid is putting him in line with the rest of what we're doing, right? So it's the same thing when people are I mean, you could go as simple as like, oh, I like, I ran a stop sign and a cop is, pulling me over to give me a ticket. That is a regulation, right? That's something that they are doing to make sure that I'm following the rules. Okay. But in the case of gender, the rules aren't written out, right? The rules um, are understood by society, well, to a certain extent, and it's not written out. It's not direct, like a police officer. So, for the sake of this quote, just think of a highly rigid regulatory frame as society. Okay, that congeals over time. Congeal. You guys ever made Jello? Same thing. You mix it with water. You mix it with whatever. Put it in the fridge, and then it becomes like the solid. Or if you guys cook at home, like if you make like something with pork or beef or whatever, and there's like fat, and then like obviously when it's hot, it's like liquid, and then when you put it in the fridge, it turns into like the white solid. That is what congealing is. Okay, over time to produce the appearance of substance of a natural sort of being, to basically seem like it is real and that it's natural. Okay, so let's put this all together. Gender is something that people do by doing certain things over and over again within society that comes together over time to make it seem like it is natural when in reality it's cultural. Okay, I'm gonna say that again. Gender is something that people do by doing certain things over and over again, so much so that it comes together over time to make it seem like it's natural, but in reality, it's cultural. Okay, so a great example, and I think this example is going to really run it home, is I remember there was this little kid, and all the girls and women in his life has had long hair, and so the boy believed that women or girls were born with long hair. That is obviously not true. Girls' hair and guys' hair is almost the same. Like you need to grow it out to get it that long, right? However, because he has seen so many girls, the repeated acts, right? He has seen so many girls with long hair, it made it seem like that was natural. But in reality, it was cultural. Okay? So now, why is this important? Because this is how gender is created in our society, and we'll see later on, this is how most culture is created, or understandings of culture is created in our society, right? Now, why is that important to being performative? When I use the bathroom, I don't say I'm a man or I'm a woman. I say I really need to use the freaking bathroom. I kick down the door and I use the bathroom, right? However, I did pick the boys or men's bathroom. That is performative, right? I am not consciously thinking about being a man or woman, but I am reinforcing and reproducing that norm, which is, men using men's restrooms or whatever, right? And so this could be a lot of things, right? The repeated acts could be, someone, I don't know, someone telling you to sit properly. It could be, when you go shopping, right? You go to Target or whatever. There's like the girls section, the men's section. I don't go to Target saying like I'm a man. I go to Target saying like I need a new, belt or pair of socks or underwear or whatever. And I'm like, okay, let me go to the men's section, right? So these are the repeated acts that we do day in and day out, the small things that repeat over time to make it seem like this is part of being a male or female, but in reality, it's a cultural influence, right? So again, basically what this is saying, okay, is that gender is created by doing things over and over again so much that they seem like they are natural. They seem like they are biological, but in reality, they are cultural. Okay, so this happens. It's honestly a little bit easier in class because then you guys can throw out examples and then it makes it really really clear. But yeah, that's basically what it is. Okay, how do you know that gender is cultural? What it is to be a man and what it is to be a woman in different cultures is different, right? Now, when I say what it is, I mean what is acceptable for men, what is acceptable for women. It is acceptable for men to, I don't know, sit with their legs open on the train. It is unacceptable for women to sit with their legs crossed, or sorry, unacceptable for women to sit with their legs open on the train, right? It is, in the past, it was more acceptable for men to smoke cigarettes, less acceptable for women to smoke cigarettes, right? And it's not to say that people didn't do it, but that's the norm, right? It is unacceptable for men to wear dresses. It is acceptable for women to wear dresses, so on and so forth. It depends on where you're from, right? That's how you know things are cultural, is that it changes, okay? Okay, so I hope that's clear. Now, if you need help with this, this is a very important slide. So if you need help with this, please do not hesitate to shoot me an email because this is very important. Okay. All right. So again, gender is cultural. And number two, sorry, the two essential points that I'm trying to have you take away from Judith Butler is that gender is cultural or performative in her words, right? And number two, gender is created through these repeated acts and appears natural after being repeated so often, when in reality it's cultural. You see this second point right here? A lot of people are going to think this is the answer, but it's just a small summary of what we just talked about. So if you write this down for the test, you're going to get it wrong. All right. Just think about that little boy who thought all women and all girls were born with long hair. That is a great example of what we're talking about with Judith Butler's quote. Okay. So remember, gender is created by doing things over and over again. Okay, and so much so that it means that it appears as if it is biological, when in reality it is cultural. All right, so this was a reading I used to have, but it's a little bit challenging, so I just kind of took away some things for you guys. So the book is called "Dude, You're a Fag: Making Masculinity in American High Schools." Okay, so this is very important. Okay, so masculinity. So actually, so basically, when you think about masculinity and femininity, okay, those are two different things. Sorry, those are very separate from being a male, being a male or a female. It's not a set definition. We just talked about this, right? Men who are what is considered masculine in one country might not be considered masculine in another country. What is considered feminine in one country might not be considered feminine in another country, right? So there are a lot of definitions of what masculine is, and they are similar for sure, but they're never truly defined, right? These gender roles are affected by our day-to-day environments. In this particular book, it was by school-related activities, right? Like, what are you supposed to do as a man or as the man in a prom situation, right? What are you supposed to be as a man as a protector in like a date on like a date? What are you supposed to do as a woman when you're trying to reject or accept or get the attention of certain people, right? These are all different things they talk about in the book, but again, the main thing is this last quote right here. The author concludes by suggesting that close attention to sexuality highlights masculinity as a process rather than social identity associated with specific bodies. So that is a very complicated way of saying is through our different understandings of masculinity and our different understandings of femininity, it is clear that those two things are cultural processes, right? Remember how I told you a long time ago, culture is a process. It's not something you can obtain, right? Even something you can have. It changes all the time. What is considered masculine today is very different from what is masculine 20 years ago, right? And that's a clear indicator that it is that masculinity and femininity are cultural. Okay, because otherwise, if it was biological, it would have stayed the same. All right, now here's the big doozy. This is the long video. Yeah. So you should. So let's see. It's okay. Technically, you're supposed to watch it right now, but if you watched it before this lecture, that's fine. It doesn't matter. So I'm going to assume that you've watched the video. Okay. Now, real quickly, first person opinions. Do you agree with the choices that Mappa has made with her family? What challenges do you think they'll face in the future? Is this quote unquote wrong? Right. So a lot of people have some pretty strong feelings about this video. And in my opinion, not to sound crass, but I don't really care. Not that I don't care about your opinion, but I don't care about how people are reacting to this because that's not the point. Just like with Diablo and Adam, even though it's a fun story, there are some pretty important anthropological things to take away from this. Okay, so a lot of people kind of don't love this video. They think this video is controversial. They think this video is all kinds of different things. I don't want to. It's a little easier in person, obviously, because then you guys can voice your opinions. But do you agree with the choices that Mappa has made with their family? Why or why not? Right? And that's an interesting question. When I first watched this video, I thought to myself, this seems like a little much. It's kind of bad for the kids, right? But then at the end, when Mappa was saying that, you know what, people want their kids to be just like them a lot of times, right? Like in normal, like in our society. So are we coming down as hard on them as we do on Mappa? Probably not. Why is that? Right? What challenges do you see they'll face in the future? What are these challenges rooted in? This is more of an anthropological question. So the challenges they're going to face in the future are very obvious, right? Even though Orebro is a gender neutral or hen friendly place, even the rest of Sweden is not as friendly to hens as that particular neighborhood or small city, and even less so outside of that country, right? So the challenges will be numerous. I can't even name all of them, right? Just like filling out a form that says male female or not being identified as male female in other workplaces, like whatever. There could be a whole bunch of challenges. But more importantly, where are these challenges coming from? Right? Why do you think they are challenges? Okay. And finally, is this thing is the hen process wrong? Do you think what Mappa is doing with their family is wrong? Now, this is the question I kind of care the least about, but it's important to analyze why you think it's wrong or right. Doesn't matter. Okay. Now, so let's apply some anthropology to this. How does this video relate back to culture? How does this reflect on things like multiculturalism and being accepted by different cultures, right? So we just learned from Judith Butler, right, how gender is created. Okay, gender is created by doing things over and over again, so much so that it appears natural when in reality it's cultural. Okay, there is no more clear example of gender being cultural than with Mappa and their kids, right? Because they are essentially creating their own culture. Sorry, they are creating. I shouldn't say creating because they didn't create it. Someone else did, but they are reinforcing and subscribing to a different gender, which is essentially subscribing to a different culture around gender. Okay, being hen is nothing necessarily that new, but is something that is a little less common in the world, right? So how does Mappa create culture, or sorry, create the hen culture for their kids, right? They talked about a lot in the beginning. They replace some of the words within storybooks with that are gender specific. They just change it to like gender neutral pronouns. They talk to the schools. They make sure they enroll their kids in the schools that are hen friendly. They let them dress certain ways. Yeah, right. These are all examples of how they subscribe and reinforce and create or whatever the culture of being hen or the culture of being gender neutral. Okay. More importantly, though, what I'd like to kind of let's see. Yeah, this is good. Okay, so what I really want to emphasize here, though, is that I really want to ask you: Is Mappa is Mappa really going? Is she? I believe that Mappa believes that Mappa is um quote unquote like kind of just rising above gender, right? But in reality, Mappa is not rising above gender. Mappa, just like we talked about earlier, gender is a framework, and Mappa is still within that framework, right? You can think of being as part we grew up, men and women teaching boys be boys and girls be girls from a young age. You can think of that as taking the Q train, to Coney Island, right? You can think of Mappa's strategy, even though Mappa believes that Mappa is not taking a train at all. Mappa is just taking the Q train, but in the Queens. She's just going opposite direction. Okay, because you cannot escape gender, just like you cannot escape culture. You are not a voluntary participant of culture. How we define things is going to determine how you define things as well. So Mappa's actions in raising the two kids, Mika and Nico, those actions are not necessarily leaving the framework of gender. It is just using the framework to scaffold to create a different type of gender that branches off, right? So, for example, the reason why I say this, why is this important? Mappa's understanding of gender is from where? Do you remember where Mappa's from? Mappa's from America, right? So, Mappa's understanding of gender is from America. Now, imagine if Mappa was in Thailand, where they are much more open to different types of sexual dispositions, right? Because Mappa was born intersex, which is when you have attributes of both male and female, right? So I can only imagine, and I don't know if this is true, but I can only imagine that Mappa faced a lot of issues. Dell is their name. Dell faced a lot of issues in America because they were intersex. But imagine if Dell grew up in a society where intersex was more acceptable, such as Thailand. Would Dell still have the same issues with gender as she does today? Definitely not, right? So it's important to understand that while Dell is completely is attempting to destroy the culture of gender, right? Or not destroy. Mappa is attempting to be outside of the culture of gender. Mappa's decisions, her behavior, the way that they are deciding to take care of their kids is completely built off of our American understanding of gender. Okay, and why is that important? Important for two reasons. One, it's important to clearly see what's going on in this video, right? I know this video is from Vice, and Vice and a lot of most things you see on the internet are going to have a clear kind of like, oh hey, this is right and this is wrong, right? We all know what type of they're basically trying to say that gender neutral is great, it's doing good, so on and so forth. But a lot of people fail to look at the nuances, the little things. Is it good? Is it bad? Remember how we talked before? Culture is neither good nor bad. It really depends on how you use it. In Mappa's case, the strict gender norms in America, like whatever 50 years ago or whatever, however old they are, was bad for her, and because of that, it is encouraging her to move in a certain direction. Okay. So Keep that in mind, right? So that's the first thing, right? Is that, again, I want you to really understand that culture is always built off of previous culture. It is never existing on its own, number one. Number two, how does MAPA recreate, or how does MAPA teach their kids to be gender neutral, right? And those are the things we talked about earlier: replacing the pronouns, dressing how you dress. Um, there's one more. Picking certain types of schools. These are the ways that we teach our children in general how to do gender, and MAPA is doing nothing different, right? So that just relates back to the Judith Butler thing, where you repeat things over and over again, and they seem biological, but in reality they're cultural. Okay, those are the two main things. Okay, one, that culture is always built off of previous culture, and number two, when we talk about gender specifically, how is MAPA creating gender for their kids? We just talked about that, right? There are ways that we create gender in our own, and if you reflect back on your own understanding of what it is to be a girl or boy or man or woman, you will see that actually what MAPA is doing is just a less efficient and less played out way of teaching their kids how to be a boy, girl, man, or woman, right? If you look at the way we grew up, it was so ingrained in our society that we didn't have to think about it really. You know what I mean? Yeah, sure, your parents and your whatever will give you tips here and there, but in reality, when it comes down to it, it's kind of like the same thing. Okay, so gender is culture, and that is why social culture anthropologists find the topic so interesting, right? Gender is cultural, thus studying how gender is formed, saying how all culture is formed. Remember, gender is created through repeated acts. So what does that mean for the video, right? And that's the stuff we talked about. We talked about how MAPA is creating the hen or the gender neutral culture for their kids. And to be fair, MAPA is not doing it all by themselves. They're doing it with their partner. They're doing it with the schools, right? In Sweden, yeah, at least kind of allegedly, right? And more importantly, we'll talk about that in the next one. Gender, like everything else, is cultural. It's scaffolding, right? It's built off of previous understandings of culture, right? Like I said, MAPA's perspective on culture would be very different if she grew up in a different country. Why? Because gender is cultural. Okay. There are intentional and unintentional regulations that created through these scaffoldings, right? So just like Diablo and Adam, right? There are always going to be things that come out that don't fit exactly what cultural whatever you call it, they're not mutation, the cultural consequences to the things that they do, right? So with Diablo and Anna, we talked a lot about the criminal system, the immigration system, the foster care system, the education system, right? And now, obviously, is it the intention for the legal system to send Korean adoptees, back to Korea despite being here for 30 years? Absolutely not. But because those policies are targeted towards other people, people like Diablo and Animal fall through the cracks, right? And it's the same thing with what the conversation they had with those two experts, right? Where the guy was talking about more boys commit suicide, boys doing poorly in school, and the expectations from the other lady of boys being cool, strong, and girls being pretty helpful, right? These are all consequences of our previous gender cultural standards, right? Boys do not naturally commit suicide more often. Boys do not naturally do poor in school, right? We are taught these things, right? Now, obviously, no one's teaching a boy to commit suicide, but the way we teach boys to be boys might be affecting the way that they look at their life, or they might be affecting the way they look at their academics, whatever it is, right? So remember that gender, just like culture, has a lot of gender, just like race, ethnicity, and nationality, have a lot of things that shoot out of that might not necessarily directly relate to what we're talking about. Okay. So this is pretty important too. I know this is kind of deep, but just try your best to get with it. Okay. So again, let me try to re-explain this last point a little bit. Intentional and unintentional regulations. Remember when I talked about the example of women working during World War II? What was their goal? Their main goal was to make more money, right? However, it changed a lot of things in our society. Of course, women were more acceptable in the workplace. Women held more position of power in the workplace, so on and so forth. That's kind of direct, right? That's a direct and like very logical understanding. But one of the things that we talked about during that lecture was, you know what else exploded? The TV dinner industry exploded. The frozen food industry exploded, right? And now we have all these hot pockets, all these cool things that we can microwave and eat and whatever. But that was an unintentional cause or unintentional effect of that small change in our society. Okay, and so just like gender, when the guy's talking about more boys commit suicide, boys being quoted in school, and their expectations of being cool and strong, and women's expectation of being pretty and helpful, these are all different unintended consequences of our cultural norms. Okay, now really, if you really think about it, there's no major difference between how gender is taught in this video versus how we learn gender in our own society. The only difference here is that we have different values, right? In the video, in Mapa's family, they value gender neutrality, and we value single gender conformity, right? Remember, at the end, when we really, for me, it really hit me. I was like, oh, people raise children just like them. And I thought about that, and I was like, that's kind of freaking true. Why are we coming down so hard on Mapa? Okay. And what it really comes down to is gender is something that we value more than, for example, what type of food you eat at home, right? So it's really important to keep that in mind, right? Because that just basically means when you're unfamiliar with something, which is most things in the world, we tend to assign certain like judgmental values to, like, this is good, this is bad, this is harmful, this is helpful, this is healthy, this is unhealthy. But in reality, are they real? Are they really differences? Or sorry, are those judgments really accurate, or is it just that we're more concerned with them being different, right? Because we're kind of like trying to, or not intentionally trying, but we're kind of regulating what is considered normal and not normal. Okay, so when we talk about this, right, you really need to ask yourself, what is the difference? What is the difference between how they're raising the kids and how we raise our kids? Okay, this conversation a lot easier in class, but like the grandmother's like, oh, I'm afraid that he's gonna get picked on in school. Okay, that's a pretty reasonable fear. But there's a lot of nerdy kids that play Yu-Gi-Oh and Magic the Gathering. Are you going to come down as hard on them as grandma's going to coming down on Mappa? I don't think so. So why is that? They're both going to get picked on. So why is that? And it comes down to, there is something about gender that makes us especially uncomfortable when we're talking about these things. That's really what it comes down to. Okay, so. And now this is the kind of like the last little thing, or actually not the last. I'll do a little takeaway later. But how do you think the question of he, she, or hen affects the story? Judging by initial appearance, how do you think this video is skew? So basically, let's do the last one first, right? This is Vice News. You already know what it's trying to say, right? Gender neutral is great. It's gender neutral is great, right? That's basically what they're trying to say. So it's really important, to look at that and understand where the story is coming from. Ethnography, right? If it was an anthropologist doing this, there would be very little of that, right? But that being said, this is very important. If it was an ethnography, you probably wouldn't be freaking watching it, because it's not going to be well produced. Because anthropologists be like, oh, this is a very biased interview, and they're not going to put it in the what's it called, the video, and it's going to be not as exciting, right? So just keep that in mind. Yes, is it a little biased? Absolutely, but you have to also understand that kind of freedom to be biased, if you will, makes a video a much more interesting video. Okay. The next thing, how do you think the question of he, she, or hen affects the story? It affects it a lot, right? Because Del or Mapa will purposely ask, I think it was Nico. Was it Mika or Nico? I think it was Nico, the older one, right? Like, hey, do you want to be he, she, or hen? But I guarantee you, on an average day, Del does not ask Nico that question, right? And so automatically, you are making the child aware that there is a big difference between he, she, or hen, right? And that's a big no-no in ethnography, because you're trying to understand how they think and how they behave. If you're forcing them to think or behave a certain way, you've already kind of messed up your research. Okay. So again, I just kind of wanted to bring this up. Like, is this a good ethnography? No, it's a terrible ethnography. But it doesn't mean that we can't find information useful in this kind of Vice News documentary style film. Okay. All right. So it is important to remember that culture is not just the superficial stuff we hear about in articles. It is deeper and much more ingrained in our lives. In this case, it is gender, but if you take a step back, this is how all of our culture is formed, right? So I hope that this video has shown you that when we think about culture, right, we're thinking about, Chinese culture, Mexican culture, Korean culture, American culture, whatever, Caribbean culture. Like these are all like places, which is great. But you really have to think about like, okay, what are some other cultural things in our lives that we deal with day to day? Gender, race, specifically race, not ethnicity, you know, is a big part of our lives, right? And they are all created in the same way. They are literally all created in the same way. So you need to ask yourself, how did I learn how to be a boy or girl? How did I learn how to be a black person? How did I learn how to I don't know, act good in class and act bad in class? Like these are all things that we're taught, right? Within our society. These are all cultural things. Now, when people say they're accepting of diversity, what do they really mean? Okay. Are they actually accepting of cultural differences, or do they just have a different set of cultural values they're willing to accept? To realistically be multicultural and accepting other cultures is a difficult task, and most people don't even know that they are being ethnocentric. So when people, like, and this goes for schools, institution, workplace, everything. When people say that they're accepting of diversity, is that for real? It's not. First of all, that's the answer to that question. It's not, because they don't understand what cultural diversity is, and they say that they are willing to, you know, accept different cultures. But are you willing to accept different cultures? Are you just willing to accept someone that's a different color? That's a completely different situation, right? So to realistically be multicultural, to really be multicultural and accepting other cultures is really difficult. And most people don't even know that they're being ethnocentric, right? Yeah, it's easy for you to be like, oh, hey, yeah, like they eat spicy food and we don't eat spicy food. Yeah, that's easy because there's not a lot of like, importance on that in our society. But for things that are important, are you going to be culturally accepting? If it is acceptable in another culture to be late, are you going to be okay? If it's acceptable for another culture to, I don't know, yell in the library, are you gonna be okay? No, you're not, right? So to be culturally accepting and to be accepting of diversity is very challenging, and people need to stop acting like it's this easy task. Okay. So the last thing right here, ethnocentrism in many ways is inevitable. However, it is important to realize the differences that exist between people are culturally caused and oftentimes not a reflection of character or intention. Now, what does that mean? Basically, what I'm trying to say is, can you know every freaking culture in the world and be familiar with it? Of course not. But what is important is that if you can realize, right, that the differences that exist among people are cultural, are cultural, and they're not trying to it's not a reflection of them like being a jerk or being rude or being an educator, whatever it is, then you have hit the gold mine right there, right? That is what you want. It is impossible. I'm going to tell you this again. It is impossible to know everyone else's culture. But what is not impossible is not judging them for their culture. Okay? That is very important. All right. So I hope you found this interesting. Again, if you have any questions, just shoot me an email. The reflection 3 will be due at the end of this week, and the midterm will be at the end of next week, and then that'll be spring break. All right. I hope you find these interesting. I put, I have a lot of pride in the topics I picked because I think they're a little spicy. But yeah, hope you enjoyed it. Like I said before, shoot me an email if you have any questions. Raymond.fong@kbcc.cuny.edu.